Welcome to StockOdds Odds and End podcast. I'm Dave Singh here with Rob Friesen, getting ready for the week ahead. Good evening, Rob. How's everything?
Hey, not too bad. Nice to have an extra day this long weekend and get caught up on things. And looking forward to a full week next week, although Monday, Europe is closed and some institutions in Canada might be offline. Some are online, but Europe's closed. So that could result in a bit of lower volumes for Monday. Just keep that in mind. And we're also, interesting what's happened in some of the sectors last week. So why don't you tell us what's happening on the economic news front this week and some earnings, and then we can roll over to comparing what happened last week with what's going on the futures side of things right now.
Sure. So Monday, there's just one report, wholesale inventories, which is important. Tuesday, there is some Fed speak going on, Chicago Fed president speaking in Philadelphia Fed. So you might get some chatter there as to interest rates and what's their take on raising interest rates more, or holding off, or pausing. And then Wednesday, we have consumer price index, core CPI, and some FOMC minutes at 2 p.m. Eastern. So that could be interesting too. And then Thursday, we have producer price index, core PPI, and Friday is U.S. retail sales and consumer sentiment. So some of the themes for the week are inflation. I mean, is it still decreasing? And then what the Fed's take on it would be, and then some data on actual prices in terms of producer prices and consumer. So that's the economic reports. And then there are some earnings. We've got Monday, Greenbrier and Tilray, the cannabis stock, Albertsons and CarMax on Tuesday. Wednesday, we have Bed Bath & Beyond and Delta Airlines. Those are some noteworthy ones. And Fastenal and Progressive Insurance, some bigger stocks. And then Friday, JP Morgan. So that'll be that's when the banks start reporting their earnings. And then the following week, we should have a lot more noteworthy earnings coming in with the brokers and whatnot. And then Friday, we also have BlackRock, Citigroup, PNC, and Wells Fargo. In terms of seasonality, we're kind of this lull. I mean, we have mid-month seasonality coming at the end of this week and early next week, which is for April is pretty flat. It's barely minus 0.02%. So pretty much flat for expected for the S&P 500. Whether we start that at the end of this week or early next week, it's not much to expect in terms of that. So that's in terms of the seasonalities and economic data. You want to talk about some of the macro, or what else next?
Yeah, I mean, as we come to the end of April, we can cover that next Sunday as well. But as we come to the end of April, there could be a potential turn of the month effect, softer at the end of April with actually up on May. Now, the challenge is, everybody's anticipating this theme that keeps getting yacked about in the media is like sell in May and go away kind of thing. And, could be a bit of anticipation of that in April. And then lo and behold, you look at the seasonality calendar and May's not too bad actually of a month. So we'll have to see how things set up. But yeah, the market, did get a bit ahead of itself, I think, with the latest numbers that we had on Friday. Now the equities were closed. Looks like the futures digested it okay. And bonds were open for half a day or so they were able to adjust. Treasuries were trading. There's still an expectation that the Fed is going to, have to hike. So there was a bit of a shift in the probability expectations, like the Fed monitoring tool. So a little bit more priced in for a hike in May that wasn't as aggressive before. But anyway, that narrative sort of bounces back and forth. I mean, it's definitely one of the drivers that we see in the markets, and yet we're not out of the woods. Nobody can say for sure there's not going to be a recession, or there is. Nobody's going to, be able to say for sure what happens in the Fed's long game here. So it drives markets. What it's doing is it's providing some volatility and some, down weeks and some up weeks and so on. So here we are. So I want to talk about the 1 week performance here. So we had communication services up 4.45%. Now, in that group, Google performed at 7.46% all by its lonesome self there. Meta, 3.97. We had T-Mobile up 3.49. Even AT&T up 2.99. And then the next group was healthcare, up 3.84%. In healthcare, it was really the healthcare plans and healthcare drug manufacturers, the larger ones like J&J was up 7.64%, Lilly up 8.10%, Merck up 6.05%, BMY, Amgen, and Pfizer all up, BIIB up. And then healthcare plans, UNH was up 9.1%. Humanis up 6.47. We had CVS up 3.8, and in medical devices we had Abbott Labs up 5.90. Medtronics, that wasn't up that much. And then moving over to the next group, utilities, they were on fire as well. We had PCG up 5.16%, Southern up 4.71%, XEL up 6.52%, just some of those. So those were on fire. Utilities was up 3.43%. And then energy was up 3.13%, even though on Friday you saw energy pull back a bit. Not every stock obviously pulled back, but Exxon for the week up 5.08%, Chevron up 3.24%, Conoco up 7.06%, EOG up 5.13%, Devon 6.14%, Hess 6.35%. So you can see that, knocking it out of the park there pretty good. And then in technology, which wasn't up big for the week because it was down slightly, 0.14% down. However, you did have some of the mega caps that had some leadership, and especially on Friday, they did help pull things along. So Microsoft was up 2.66, Apple up 1.42. Now ServiceNow was up 7.62, FIS up 6.25, Intel, in terms of semiconductors, all the other ones were down. It was like, seriously, it was like buy Intel and short everything else. AMD was down 5.53, Intel was up 2.24. And then you had a little bit of the credit card stuff and some insurance was okay. Berkshire was up and things like that. So that's a general framework of what happened last week. And that brings us to the point that there are some of these candidates that can make for excellent mean reversion for the following week. So you can look at StockOdds and you can say, all right, I can create some if-then statements, and I can either approach it from a swing trade perspective, or I could approach it from each day, open to close, and each day's fresh. But I would take a look at some of these weekly performers that, produced outsized returns and see if you can catch any reversal of that, because it's not that everything that goes up has to come back down, but there can be a macro that sort of temporary affected these that may run out of gas, it may run out of steam. Why was Lilly up 8.1%? Why was UNH up 9.1%? Why was Google up 7.46%? I mean, we're in a lull week where there's not as much earnings going on. None of these big names have earnings this week. So, we're in that, and there's not a lot of economic drivers either. So we're kind of in a lull week. So maybe they'll just sit on their laurels, like how they performed, and they'll just hang out there. But there is an opportunity for mean reversion. and I would definitely look for that, especially if you can find some ducks that line up in stock odds that say, hey, this makes an excellent short candidate because, when it's had this type of performance. And I would focus on the ones that, perhaps did really well for the week, along with doing really well for Friday. And maybe they got stretched out pretty good. So focus on that. Now let's just take a look at the futures to see where we're at here. So the Dow Jones futures are pretty much flat. They're only up 20 points, which is pretty benign. S&P is also flat, down a quarter of a point, or 3/4 of a point, sorry. NASDAQ is down 29.5 points, or 0.22%. And Russell is actually up 5.9 and 0.33%. And of that, I mean, there's quite a dichotomy between how the NASDAQ has performed year to date, and especially for the month of March and into April, versus how the Russell's performed year to date and through the month of March and into April. So huge differences there. And I do see an appetite, in the small caps when it's a risk on day, when the market is favorable. But it's the opposite. If there's some bad news, macro's not looking good, recession, lack of growth. The IMF just came out with the world's growth expectations, and it's not looking very promising for the next number of years. If that's the case, and growth is affected, the small caps definitely feel it. Okay. So going into energy, we see that we had that massive gap up on Monday, and it's just hung out there. The West Texas crude has just hovered around the $80 a barrel. And it's becoming more relevant than Brent crude now because of the limitations of supply on the Brent crude side. So West Texas is taking a more dominant role, and it's just hanging out at the 80. So watch for a break either way, to the upside or the downside. Now, the cuts don't start until May, so we have some time here for this thing to pull back if it wants to. Going into bonds, so we're up just slightly, 0.12. So we had a bit of a pullback there on Friday with the job numbers. So that tells me that they were looking at it a little bit more from, this kind of means, a little bit more of a rate hike emphasis. So that's what that's telling me. But it wasn't dramatic, looking at the dollar to see how it responded as well. Friday it was up a little bit, and it's up a little bit now, 0.14. Okay, looking at the metals, how are they responding? Gold, is down right now about 1%. So it's not doing too well. I mean, it didn't trade on Friday. It was closed, so it's starting to adjust right now to a little bit of the dollar movement, but it's down 1%. That 2050 area and on up into 2078 are going to be the numbers that we look at. If it can get above 2050 and up to 2078, then we'll really be able to see where we're going with gold. All right. I think that kind of wraps it up here. There's a lot of action that's been going on in the Middle East with Israel and Iran and Lebanon and Syria and all that. There's been a lot of ramped up, and this happens every year over this same weekend. They always have incidences and attacks, but it's been a pretty active session of things being fired at Israel, and then of course Israel responding. So lots of global activity. The Taiwan thing is starting to heat up again. So just keep your eyes on that, and expect surprises. Expect things to happen. That's the kind of world that we're in, and the kind of macro and political stuff that's going on. So fasten your seatbelts, and have a good trading week, everyone. Thanks for listening.